America, my name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live every Thursday in the afternoon. Today I'm going to do a special Tuesday show because there's some issues that we need to talk about as people and that we get confused about. And what does R. Kelly, Will Smith, and Black masculinity all have in common is that they're all overdetermined by what it is to be a black male in America. Because make no mistake, what it is to be a black male in America is to always be considered a sexual threat. So that has substantively formed black masculinity in America. You know, it's funny. My students get into shock about this, but I always tell them that, I think I was about 12 when I worried that I might be a rapist. Now, mind you, at 12, I had not ever kissed a girl, but being a sexual assailant isn't always up to you. A lot of black men have actually had intimate relationships with women, and it turns out that the next day they found out it was sexual assault. It wasn't. So people talk about, how old women are when they feel like they might be sexual assault victims or potential sexual assault victims. I was keenly aware of, especially when I moved to a white suburb, how old I was when I could be a sexual assault assailant. Because once again, that is not up to you. There's this notion that it is up to the assailant about whether they're an assailant. It's not. It's not. A good number of black people have been black males have been retroactively deemed assailants. And I did not want that to be my fate. So a lot of the job of a black male is to not be considered a rapist. That is the side gig. The side job of a black male is to not be considered a rapist and to do everything in your power to make sure that you avoid the presumption of being a rapist, because the default is that you're a rapist, especially if you take up space or you have some bass in your voice. This is why I suspect between Chris Brown and R. Kelly, I suspect a lot of falsetto black singers are themselves victims. If you don't know that, if you're talking about R. Kelly and not actually considering that he himself was a victim, then you're not actually worried about getting rid of sexual assault. You just want to kind of blame men. I'll say this again. If you're talking about R. Kelly and his conviction and for what he did and not dealing with the fact that he himself was a victim, and it turns out that sexual abuse victims abusers abuse. This isn't a problem, but if you don't actually deal with the abuse and have a structure to talk about Kelly as an abuser, you can't be surprised when he abuses, and he's going to abuse many times his numbers. So you go ahead and abuse R. Kelly, and then he's going to abuse many times his number because you abused him and never actually dealt with his abuse. And I bet R. Kelly's abuser, who apparently was one of his aunts from when he was a little boy for a long time, was herself abused. Right. So you never actually deal with the system and then you're surprised when it perpetuates. Right. So yes, R. Kelly, he did a bad thing and he should be punished. But if you're actually serious about dealing with sexual abuse, you can't just deal with it as an R. Kelly thing or a man thing. You have to deal with the R. Kelly as a victim thing. And when I say that we have a hard time dealing with black men as a victim, let me show you a clip of how we dealt with Chris Brown, because Chris Brown, everybody knows, if you know Chris Brown, he's a heck of a dancer. And also he was abusive in his relationship with Rihanna. But this is I'm going to get you a story of Chris Brown. This is Chris Brown. A story that's about Chris Brown in his own life, and this is you have to think about, this is what Chris Brown went through. So let me just play this, and this is how Chris Brown was treated after what he went through.
Hi, Hollywood Lifers. This is Holly Baz with Bonnie
and Chloe.
Chris Brown gave another interview in which he told The Guardian that he actually lost his virginity at the age of 8.
What? That is crazy.
That is so young.
So crazy. And actually, HollywoodLife.com, we've spoken to a source close to Rihanna who says she's not surprised because he was basically a beast in bed and that they used to have crazy sex together. This is a little TMI for me, Bonnie. I don't really want to know that Chris Brown lost his virginity at 8.
Well, you do know, and you're talking about it, and Rihanna felt that it actually, because he got started so young, that's why he was so good.
I'm blushing right now. I don't know if you can see.
And apparently, once they had made up, when they got back together last year, our source tells us that Rihanna felt that the makeup sex was just wild. So now we know another reason why they got back together.
Yeah, well, and now they're not together anymore, so maybe she kind of got over the fact that his sex was so great. But also, though, we have spoken to a source close to Chris, Bonnie, who says exactly how he feels about losing his virginity at 8.
Well, he doesn't think it was any big deal. In fact, he thinks that it was a great thing because he got started early and he got lots of experience.
Well, you know what? You can't go back in time and change that. All right, guys, so tell us what you think. Do you think that it's TMI that Chris revealed that he lost his virginity at the age of 8 years old? That's like the 2nd grade. Subscribe right here and come back to HollywoodLife.com. Bye, guys.
Bye.
So Chris Brown was raped, and those ladies were tittering about it, and that's why we can't actually deal with we can't actually deal with sexual assault, especially in our community, because it turns out our communities are violent for external stresses, but sometimes those external stresses are realized in internal relationships and in home relationships, right? So instead of actually dealing with that, we titter about the idea that Chris Brown was raped. He was raped. He was 8 years old. I have a daughter who is almost 9. That means he was raped. And we don't understand it as that and then he grows up to be an abusive guy. R. Kelly, also another guy, Lil Wayne. All these guys were assaulted themselves. And instead of actually dealing with the system that predictably produces their assault and then they go on to assault other people, we just want to just say, well, they're deviant men. And that's just not appropriate. That's inappropriate. Fundamentally, we're dealing with victims who are themselves become perpetrators, and we should deal with them as victims who become perpetrators if we're actually serious about dealing with sexual assault. Now, what does this have to do with Will Smith? Will Smith, it's interesting that you don't find a white version of Will Smith, right? Why isn't there a white version of Will Smith? And when I say a white version of Will Smith, that means an actor who is the biggest draw in his game and is kind of troubled because his wife wants to sleep around a little bit. And I'm actually pro swinging. I think swingers should swing. I think the marriage isn't about how you get it in necessarily. And the people who if you want to swing, work it out with your partner, and that, because that's what marriage is about, working it out with your partner. But I'm not, let the swingers swing if they want to swing, and just work it out with your partner, how that is. So it's not that. But what I'm dealing with, what's interesting about Smith is that how he is kind of being treated in this kind of expose. And that's asymmetrical. You just don't see white guys in that position who are treated like this. And I think, you could say all you want about black men being the white men of black people. It's just not true, because black men are black men in America, right? Black Americans are black Americans, right? So this idea that black men are somehow patriarchs, Will Smith is the biggest of us. And he is very much a black man. And this is just, and it is what it is. His situation is what it is. And that's why I'm treating it. And it's not particularly surprising. It's not particularly surprising. If this were happening to a big deal white, icon, it would be particularly surprising. But it's not particularly surprising, because we all know that Will Smith is a black man and Jada Pinkett's a black woman, and they, they're working it out the way they work it out. And it's not surprising that she has sex with other guys. It would be surprising if you could say the same thing about Clint Eastwood. And it went down like this. Or I don't know, Tom Hanks. If you don't find this about Tom Hanks. Why isn't, and Will Smith is, I think Tom Hanks is an equivalent figure for the whites as Will Smith is for the blacks. And it's not an accident that you don't find this about Tom Hanks, because like there's no like black masculinity is markedly different than white masculinity. Like there's no patriarchy. Like there's fake patriarchy that's a lot of it put on by people with class aspirations who want to be white. Like Will Smith is in the blackest situation you could be in, and that's why it's not surprising. It's not surprising, right? And you have to think of people like R. Kelly as a victim. You have to think about Chris Brown as a victim. Victims who also are perpetrators, but they're also victims. So what do you do with them? Well, you figure out the systems that led to them being victimized, because it's not just them. It's happening to black boys all over, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. They're indifferent. Or if you're Chris Brown, they laugh at it. Say you had sex, you lost your virginity, not you were raped, because Chris Brown was raped. Lil Wayne was raped. R. Kelly was raped. And then they have distorted views about sexual relationships because they were raped in a very hostile environment. And like with R. Kelly, and I suspect Chris Brown, there are going to be like all sorts of other like infrastructure mechanisms that supply. I have horror stories of like teachers who let R. Kelly into hunt at his high school, Kenwood High School in Chicago. So like there was an entire infrastructure that supported these guys, and even the fathers of the girls involved. So like this is what happened. This is what happens when desperate and degraded people like also have sex. Like black people are desperate and degraded in these United States, and they also have sex. So what it's going to look like is desperate and degraded sexual relationships, or disproportionately so. Or it's going to look like actually like, according to studies, more liberal and egalitarian relationships that you see like in Will Smith's relationship. Because like the notion of manhood is going to be markedly different. Tommy Curry's got a great book on this. I have it right here. This is a good book. The Man Not. The Man Not came out probably about 4 years ago, written by Tommy Curry. He's a professor at the University of Edinburgh, does fantastic work. And I marked it, so I can probably tell you the exact page. I marked a lot of this book, where he goes into like actually black men are relatively progressive. Yeah, they're relative. It's in the introduction toward a genre study of black male death and dying. It turns out black males do not just exist in order to be shot down in the police. We actually have our own sense of like being and masculinity. And it also turns out that there's an enormous interest in black men being rapists. And this is why if you're a black man, you have to worry about always on the defense of being considered or reconceived or construed as a rapist. I know, like, and I kind of gave up that. It's a whole job. It's a whole kind of tax that I didn't want kind of draining my chi to always kind of present myself as not a rapist under the presumption that I'm a rapist. People think about being black as about being followed around in stores, but really it's about being like a rapist. And being presumed to be a rapist and spending all your energy trying to show yourself that you're not a rapist. And I did not want to spend my energy that way because, make no mistake, I am a threat, right? So when you have to spend all of your time showing yourself to not be a rapist, what you're doing is showing yourself to not be a threat. But I am a threat, just not in that way. I'm a threat in other ways. But in order to show yourself to not be a rapist, you have to show yourself to not be a threat in any way. And I'm not about to show myself to not be a threat in any way. Some people could say that since I'm like, pretty loudly not a feminist, I'm a threat to women. So there's a way in which, depending on who you talk to, I'm a threat to women. Just not in that way. I'm a threat to women in another way. But in order to show myself to not be a rapist, I have to show myself to not be a threat in any way, and I'm not about to do that because not doing that means you like actually sacrifice the position of black men and their vulnerability, and you can't speak about their vulnerability and their degradation and their oppression. And I'm going to speak about their degradation and oppression, and a lot of the degradation and oppression that is heaped upon black men doesn't isn't necessarily because they're merely black, but because they're men. And a lot of the perpetrators of this degradation isn't necessarily white people and white people because they're white, or it's white women, and they degrade black men. Your teachers, a lot of you know this because you went to public school and you had your white lady teachers who degraded you in ways that white men weren't actually allowed to do. Right. So like there's certain kind of degradation, there's certain kind of gendered power in this America, in the division of like racial control that, white women can do because they're women, and women can do because they're women. You're more vulnerable because they're women. And unless you, and if you're not going to talk about that, then you're not actually serious about like securing justice for black people and black men in these United States. But if you do that, you're going to be considered a threat. So I am threatening. Boo. I am a threat. But in order to not be considered a rapist, I have to show myself I have to constantly show myself to not be considered a threat. And I refused to do that about 10 years ago. So I just kind of gave up. I just kind of gave up not being considered a threat. And I just say, yes, you're damn right I'm threatening. Yes, I am threatening. Just not in the way you think, but you're not going to believe that. And since you can retroactively, and no small amount of black men have been retroactively considered assailants, you're not even in control of whether you're an assailant. So that means you have to like do nothing. And that's like telling a woman that like, well, she can't wear a dress and go outside or she's asking for it. No, women should be able to wear dresses and go outside. And black men should be able to like, ask out women and occasionally have sex. And it not retroactively be considered rape or assault or harassment, right? So if you're going to live your life without actually being a threat in any way, you're not going to live much of a life. In the same way, if you're going to live your life without being a victim, like without putting yourself to be vulnerable in any way, you're not going to live much of a life. The issue is that everybody needs discretion, and black men are not given discretion. You're assumed to be this close to being a rapist, and America needs you to be this close to being a rapist in order to legitimize the way we police and degrade you, and to keep you in line, control your behavior. Once you get an America where black men aren't terrified of being considered rapists would be completely unrecognizable. It'd be unrecognizable. And that's just the truth. Right? Everyone would look and sound like me. Not everyone, but like a lot more people. The reason why more people don't look and sound like me is because they're terrified of being construed as rapists. And so if you want more people to look and sound like me, first of all, if you want more people to look and sound like me, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15 or $50 a month to keep me doing these videos. Cause I'd like to grow and bills to pay. And, but if you want more people to look and sound like me and make the kind of arguments that I'm making, you're going to have to like lean in to the stigma and understand the stakes are the reason why more people don't look and sound like me is because they're terrified of being considered a sexual threat. As long as you're scared of being considered a sexual threat, you're not going to do the damn thing for black people in America. As long as you're scared of, I'll say this again, as long as you are scared of being considered a sexual threat, you're not going to do a damn thing for black people in America. Not really. Because the moment you start trying to do something for black people in America, you are going to be construed as a sexual threat. Unless you're like Morgan Freeman age. So you got to lean into that. Just lean into it. And lean into it early and just deal with it, because like as soon as you start making moves for black people in America, you're going to be considered a sexual threat, especially if you happen to like sex. So if you want free black people, then we need to have this conversation. Send this video around, share it on your social media, and I will talk to you on Thursday.